If you still remembered, in our introduction to DAX, we talked about two types of measures. We talked about implicit measure and explicit measure. So what I'm going to do right now is just to copy this pivot table here. I'm going to drop this one right here to show you what is an implicit measure and what is an explicit measure. So coming here now, I don't want to use this revenue. It will not actually give me what we want. I want to get the revenue away. And as well, I want to take off the revenue away from here. So if I come here now on my pivot or my on my fact table, I can decide to drag any of these columns right here, right now, into this particular side of the value box here. And what it gives me is the sum of my product ID. This is not what we want. What we want to see is how many transactions we've had for every single age bucket. And if I go right here, I click on it, I can actually come here and say value field settings. And what I want is just the count of it. And if I click on OK, it gives me the count of the transaction over time. So we just go ahead and do this. So now here we go. So what we've just done now is called implicit measure, because we just drag what we have here into here and automatically it defaulted into a particular number. So the reason why we have it defaulted to a sum was because we dragged in a value column. What if I go ahead and drag something like, I'm looking forward to seeing this. Okay, let us try date and see. So dragging date right here automatically defaulted to count because date is not value. But when you bring in value right here, the default is actually sum. So that is not where we are going. So where we are going now is this. This is called implicit measure. Let me write it out for you to see what I'm talking about. Implicit measure. So implicit measure is just an auto sum. Automatically, it gives you the value you're looking forward to seeing without you having to create the measure. So what if we want to actually create this measure ourselves? We don't want to actually drag any column from here to do that. So this is where the explicit measure comes in. So explicit measure comes in. So now I'm going to have this on highlight. Come here and we go to our power pivot. So we click on measure, new, and now we want to store it still inside fact table here. And from here, I'm going to type in my transaction, number of transaction with the hash. And I will come here and use a function called distinct count. Oh, sorry, count rows, rather. Count rows. So count rows will definitely count how many rows I have inside my transactional table. I'm going to explain to you what this count rows does, and you'll see how it works. So count rows, what table do I want to count its rows? So this is the table right here, this particular table here. The fact table will be the table, fact table. And if I close it now and check if this is okay, nicely done. This is going to be number. And it's gonna be a whole number, and we put the comma separator right there. We click on OK. Let's see what we have. Can you see what we have right now? Here is our measure. So we can reuse this measure over and over again. But this one here is actually an implicit measure, which would not work with just value, except we just drag in a column that has to do with text, and it's going to default to count for us. So if it has to be a column with value, we would have to turn it to count manually ourselves. But this right here, the case is different. This is actually working with a DAX measure called count rows. So let me show you how count rows evaluate this. Let's say we have this table here right now with columns inside it and rows. So here we have this and we have this. So we're going to make sure we divide them into a column just like this. Don't mind my sketching right here. It's actually awkward and I don't like it myself. Okay, now you're going to have values inside this. So we have this filled up with value, even though if there is no value on this one, and you have value here, and there is no value here. So you have value here, and there is no value here. You have here, and you have some value filled up right here. So what controls does? Controls will not ignore any, blank you have inside your table. As soon as this particular table contains data all through in some aspect. Let us take, for example, we have another one here right now, and here we have another row beneath it. None of the column has any data. So this is where the count row will now ignore this particular row down, because there is nothing sitting here. You get it? So the perfect example is that from this side now, I'm going to open a new sheet. So now here we have this table here. So I'm going to color this table. So let's actually go ahead and do this. I'm going to say border all. So inside this table, if we have data to this extent here, so I'm going to give it the background color to stand it out a bit. So on this particular colored part, if our data stops right here, so when we use count row we just count and stop here. It doesn't matter if we don't have data in all of them. If there is no data in this part of the table and there is data in other part of the table, the count row will still work because it's counting how many rows do you have data right in. So it's ignoring any other part of it. That is how the count rows in DAX actually work. So we've just used the count rows to create an explicit measure right now, which actually helps us to actually count how many rows we have in our fact table. And that is beautiful. Now you've known what is the difference between implicit measure and explicit measure. Implicit measure is auto aggregation, while the explicit measure is what we decide to calculate ourselves. And more of this explicit measure would be coming.